Nintendo does what Sega Genesis never do, and that's give you expensive games. As we all know, the Switch 2 is coming out to be released very soon, and there's been a lot of dilemma and discrepancy on the pricing of the games. Now, if you know anything about video game history, Nintendo has never been the cheap option as far as the games. Yeah, they go with a low price point entry on the systems. For example, the Wii was the most, in my opinion, successful console of the Nintendo, because not only was it an affordable console, the games were pretty good, and it appealed to a wide range of age groups, including people that was 60s and up playing Wii Sports and bowling, younger crowd. So the Wii, in my opinion, was the most successful Nintendo game console. Now, make no mistake, I will always give Nintendo props for what they did for the video game crash that happened in the late 70s, dealing with the surplus or overstock of video games during that time. One of those notable events was the E.T. game, in that there were so many produced and not enough purchased, that where it created so much e-waste that a lot of those games ended up in the landfill. And so what happened was Nintendo kind of revitalized the gaming industry and put it back on track to as what we know of it as today. But at the same token, we're going to talk about this whole transition in pricing, why some of the reasons why the games may be so expensive. Now, once again, I had a discussion about the 5th gen, and if you want to check out that video, click on this link above. Also, I did a documentary on the Sega Saturn and why there are a lot of games that'll be missed on this console. Definitely click on those videos up here. The reason why I always stress that you have to look into the 5th gen is because this was when there was a big leap in technology, meaning that games were going from 2D to 3D, and they needed a lot more storage space in order to fit their new technology, the new games and graphics on. The problem is Nintendo, what they decided to do was stick to cartridge games. And at that time, making a cartridge was very much expensive. When all the other platforms, they went and decided to go with CD-based games. Not only were they able to save a lot of money in the production of the game, that brought the price point down on each game very cheap. And so what I'm essentially saying is $70, $80 games is not a new concept for Nintendo. As a matter of fact, I'll leave a picture right here of a Nintendo 64 game that's 75 bucks. And so this is nothing new to Nintendo. The consoles are cheap while the games are expensive. On contrast, like if you look at something like an Xbox, for example, the Xbox console was a little bit more expensive, but the games were cheaper. And so this is what you want to consider when we're talking about the Nintendo Switch 2. I also want to mention the 7th gen. Now, I want to talk about handheld consoles. And for example, the UMD by Sony PSP was actually almost 3 to 4 times larger than your Nintendo DS cartridges. The max file size was 512 megabytes on a Nintendo DS cartridge, whereas a UMD could be 1.8 gigabytes. So I'll give you this contrast right here. The Sony PSP had the UMD. The UMD was 1.8 gigabytes in size, and the Nintendo DS cartridge was at max 512 megabytes. So this meeting right here was almost 4 times as big as the Nintendo DS cartridge. Which one do you think was more expensive to produce? Obviously the cartridges. And so this is something that Nintendo has decided to do. So everywhere from starting off from the NES console, your Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, even your Virtual Boy, all the handhelds all use cartridges. And I don't think there's ever been a portable handheld by Nintendo that used a CD form or disc form. It's always been a cartridge. And so that's one aspect you have to consider that got rolled into the price. So the 5th gen was really where this was made apparent, because Sony was new on the scene and they were actually the most affordable at the time as far as the games are concerned. You could find Sony PlayStation 1 games anywhere from $19.99 all the way up to $49.99. That was significantly cheaper than your Nintendo cartridges. Matter of fact, Nintendo 64 games in that era were the most expensive games. Sega Saturn was in kind of like the middle, and you would consider Sony PlayStation to find more budget games within that console. And so I'm making this video to say this is nothing new from Nintendo. We all know if you're a Nintendo fan, you're gonna buy the Nintendo Switch 2, number one, for the leap in technology. They have like a little mouse feature to where you can move the mouse and the magnetic controllers, and you're gonna get it for the new features. You're also gonna get it for the updated graphics. You're also going to get your typical, I would say, Nintendo lineup, which is going to be, you know, your Zeldas, your Mario games. So you're going to get the Switch 2 for that. So I believe that most Nintendo enthusiasts don't really get the Nintendo, are really concerned about the price of the games, because if that was a really major concern, then they wouldn't sell out like they would. Now, for me, I think the best overall, even though there was a lot of bloatware, is Nintendo Wii. The Nintendo Wii, to me, was the most successful console in Nintendo because of the wide range of people it will reach. And so what I'm saying is the compact disc or digital is going to be the cheapest options here on in the future. And that's why most of the games digitally shouldn't have a markup of $70 or $80. Possibly if the Switch 2 comes out with more digital games, you can get your savings there. But I still think like $50 for a digital game is kind of asking a lot. Maybe this should be like $29.99 and under. So I don't know. Let me know what your opinions are on the Switch 2 and the pricing of the games. So I just want to mention this, being that the media that a system produces is going to affect the pricing of the games. So I wanted to make this video. This is part one of a discussion I'm going to have about the Nintendo Switch, is the media they choose. Now, if we think about them as a game company, they have for most of the time been a decent entry-level system as far as the price. Now, when we're talking about Nintendo 64, I remember them being, I think it was $299 or $249 at some time, but the games were always expensive. They were like on average $64, $74, and that wasn't the cheapest console that you could get in that era. As a matter of fact, I believe the Sega Saturn was upwards peaking to the most expensive console in that era, but it was because of the technology that was built in the 5th gen. Now, the games themselves, I would say, were middle ground around that $30 range, $29 range. Whereas PlayStation was really the winner in this era. Even though they didn't have the best of everything technology-wise, their games you could find brand new for $19.99. And so part of the expense that came in was the cartridge. Now, let's really think about this. You have the Nintendo console NES cartridge base, Super Nintendo cartridge base. Then you get into the Nintendo 64, also cartridge based. All their handhelds, even up to date, have all been cartridge based, including the Virtual Boy. And guess what? Cartridges are more expensive to produce. So consider, regardless of what generation of Nintendo console that you have, you're going to have cartridges. Now, they did it one time, and I'll say from the GameCube on up, they went to CDs for their main console. But being that they got rid of the whole home console based concept and have it all in one with the Switch, they went right back to cartridges. And so that expense obviously will come back into play. In this era, you can find Xbox games, PS4 games for $14.99, $19.99. But a lot of those games started off in the higher earmarks of like $40s and $50. Well, the point of what I'm saying is a lot of your expense, if you're a Nintendo person, is going to be in the format itself. Now, this was a major issue, and I'll give a little history on this. Every generation there's going to be a leap and bound in technology, and as the games get more complex, the textures get better, and the features and the programming in the games gets on a higher level, they're going to need more room. And so at one point in time, the cartridge was more sufficient than any other media they had out there. But when compact discs or CDs came out, it went over to CDs, and you could hold more information in CDs. And that's why when you really look at the Nintendo 64 games, although the system was a higher bit, the Sega Saturn and PlayStation games looked more detailed, had more depth, and were much deeper and longer games for the price. You can get 2 and 4 disc set games for like half the price of a Nintendo 64 game. This is just what it was. So normally when you're dealing with a Nintendo console, you're going to get cheap console, expensive games. When you're dealing with, in that era, Sega Genesis or, Sega or PlayStation, you're going to get a little more expensive console and cheaper games in the long run. And I would rather have it that way because I'll be able to get more games and I'm getting the more in-depth games with more memory and more gameplay. Now, I want to make a good point here. Let's skip to the 7th gen, and you have the 3DS and the Sony PSP, which was meant to compete with the 3DS. They also made a wise choice in their format too, because they made UMDs that had actual movies on them. So not only could you use your console to watch movies, because at that time there was no like Netflix or anything where you could just watch a bunch of movies for a set price each month, but you could also play your games as well too. The UMD itself was 1.8 gigabytes. Now think about that. That's way more gameplay textures. And that's why you had a Grand Theft Auto, legit Grand Theft Auto, on the Sony PSP. Whereas with the Nintendo 3DS, you only have 512 megabytes in the cartridge. And so, like I said, they start off cartridge based, then CDs, then cartridge again, and then you get into DVD and Blu-ray and HD. And so those formats, I think a double layered Blu-ray is like almost I think 10 gigabytes or more. I could be wrong. You correct me in the comments, but it is substantially larger than any cartridge that you could have at the time. And then now with the introduction of the Switch 2, I believe they're having 256 gigabytes of storage on the console. And the games still range from 4 gigs to, I think, maybe at the most, I think 10 or 20 gigs. So you're not going to have huge games on a Switch 2, but the cartridges will be more. And part of that is the manufacturing process. And so CDs, DVDs, even though they're being phased out, it is a cheaper way to bring the game out in a tangible form. But also, digital games are also going to phase that out. And so if, my opinion, if the games are $70 on digital, that's just a markup. And I think they could bring the prices down on the games. But that's never been Nintendo style. They have always had expensive games. And that's part of the reason why I became more leaning towards Sega, more leaning towards Xbox. I don't even have Xbox Pass. I buy my games individually at a time because I play through my games, and it's worth more to me to buy a game here and there, or trade a game, get the money, and then buy another game. So it's worth it more to me to buy my games individually than having Xbox Pass, because I won't get through the games in the month. So every month I'll be paying, I'm not sure what the rate is now, but $14.99 or something like that for Xbox Game Pass, and I haven't even gotten through the games yet. So I buy my games and play them as I go when I'm ready. And so that's just the type of gamer that I am, and anything else that I can get digitally on PC, I'll play it that way. And so this is just part one. It's about the media, guys, and when you have an evolution in the history line, what happens is there's leaps and bounds in technology, and usually it alternates. So we went all the way up to now that we're at fully digital point where it's a download and it depends on your storage. So now more important than ever is how much built-in storage does a console have? And it creates new problems, meaning that like if I max out my 256 gigabytes of storage on my Switch 2, then I have to delete a game or delete save files in order to put the new game on. So that's things to consider. And this is some issues in newer modern gaming that will have reoccurs. For example, the PS Vita, where if your storage wasn't big enough, you would have to delete games, remove games. And those are some of the nuances that I don't like about digital gaming. It depends on your storage, and can you get the storage cheap? And so that's really what Switch 2 is going to be running into with Nintendo, is storage issues and also price points of the physical games. Now, if they come out with cheap digital games, I think they would really be successful, just like with the Nintendo Wii. Now, when the Wii U came out, the games were expensive then too, and then also people didn't know that it was an actual new system that was more capable. So I don't want to see the Switch 2, even though I'm not really a big Nintendo fan. I really don't want to see the Switch 2 go through the same things as the Wii U. But if the price points are wrong, they're definitely going to feel the pain. And so, guys, what do you think about Nintendo out there? Me personally, anything from the, I would say, 6th gen and back is Sega for me. It's always been that way. I love the quality. I love the speed of the games. And I love the type of games they always had. But 7th gen and up, I went from Xbox. I never touched, well, PlayStation 3 is the farthest I went. But I went later on in life. And then I'm working on getting a PlayStation 4 and some games. But 5 is just way too out of my price range. But guys, let me know what type of gaming you do, what format you prefer. Are you a digital person? Are you a cartridge-based person, or do you like CDs and DVDs? And what do you think about the Switch 2? Are you excited about it coming out? Me personally, I'm looking to see what some of the other companies are going to offer in this up-and-coming generation. And I'll probably be going back and exploring the Switch 1, the first Switch, and some of the games, like you know, some of the Zelda games and things of that nature. But let me know what you think about the video. I appreciate the discussion. This is part 1, so media is important. All right, so next week hopefully we'll have a different discussion on the other reasons why the Switch 2 games are really expensive. All right, take care, have a good Friday, peace.